All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Patok na Patok Day 2. I am Gilbert Ke, Assistant Professor of the Department of Communication, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for the day. Yesterday, we unpacked what it means for something to be Patok, from fandoms to platforms to identities. Today, we continue that conversation, going even deeper into how cultures move, transform, and connect us. We start our morning with our second keynote speaker, an academic rock star whose work has fundamentally shaped how we understand media, fandom, and participatory culture. He is the Provost Professor of Communication, Journalism, Cinematic Arts, Education, and East Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of Southern California. His first book, Textual Poachers, Television Fans and Participatory Culture, will soon be reissued a 35th anniversary edition, representing a classic in the field. He is also the editor or author of more than 25 other books, including Convergence Culture, where old and new media collide, Spreadable Media, creating meaning and value in a network culture, by any media necessary, case studies of creative social change, and the forthcoming Global Handbook of the Civic Imagination. Please join me in welcoming Professor Henry Jenkins.
Hello, how are you? I wish I could be there in person. I have always wanted to go to the Philippines and to experience what fandom is like in your part of the world. And hopefully soon I will get there. I am going to become untethered from USC in about a year and a half and planning to be a free agent roaming the earth, as they say in Pulp Fiction, and spending time in residence in various countries. So I'm eager to find a way to connect there. So I hope to see you soon in person. But today, I'm going to share a little bit of what I've been thinking about lately. Some of the ideas for this come from the series of books that Robert Kosnetz and I are writing, called the Frames of Fandom series, and you're getting a peek at fandom and globalization a bit. But it also comes out of talks that I've been giving around K-pop culture and work that we do through our transcultural fandom network. We host a Zoom events every other week here from LA, but we have participants from all over the world. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, we have about a 250-person mailing list for our talks so far. Please send me email at hjenkins@usc.edu. That's hjenkins@usc.edu for anyone who would like to plug into our network and maybe attend some of our Zoom lectures. Because we're realizing today that Zoom enables us to connect together in different ways than ever before, and the barriers start to break down. And I give so many talks now on Zoom in countries that I never be able to visit otherwise, and I'm excited by that ability to bring different scholarly communities together. So today I'm going to talk about For the Fans, ! How we became demon hunters. And obviously I'm thinking using K-pop demon hunters as a vehicle to think about global cultural flows, global fandoms, and what enables a text to become as hugely successful as this one has. And I begin with Jun Bong-ho winning the Golden Globe. He also would go on to win the Oscar for Parasite. But during his Golden Globe speech, he had some famous lines that once you, i.e. people from my country, Americans, overcome the 1-inch tall barrier of subtitles, you will be introduced to so many more amazing films. And so I'm going to talk today about what I call the global shuffle, which is suddenly America is in the midst of a network of media content from every corner of the world. And I find now that if I read a story about a film in China, Korea, the Philippines, and I look it up, I can find it somewhere online, streaming. It may be streaming illegally. It may be a peripheral, small-scale streamer. It may be Eastern European television as movies up that they probably shouldn't, that you can access. Or it may be Netflix or Amazon Prime or any other service. So the amount of global media we have access to in my country has never been greater. It's just been an explosion. So access is no longer the question per se, at least for many of the countries producing media. But the question is, there's no publicity, there's no awareness, there's no sorting out of the pieces. So a film that won all the awards across Asia may be just dumped on Tubi alongside lots of low-budget horror films and never heard from again. So, but I think I'm interested in this moment in time where this global shuffle is opening up, where we have access to media that we would not, under other historical circumstances, have access to, and we don't quite know how to put a context around it. It's not following traditional trade routes. It's not following diasporic communities. It's not following any of the other factors that have historically shaped access to stories, images, sounds in the past. So my former grad school classmate, Michael Curtin, writes, after almost a century of American hegemony, the topographies of media industries are today growing more plastic and complicated as media institutions scale their ambitions and operation in an increasingly porous and dynamic environment. And on the side here, we see the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, which could not be a more American institution, but we see there the cat and the tiger and the raven, the K-pop demon hunters, were balloons. Huntrix is singing. That's one of about a dozen different non-U.S. media properties I counted on display at the parade this year. And really non-American based media properties like anime properties like One Piece far outnumbered the domestic properties at this classic American institution. So Curtin continues, remarkably, adaptations move up and down as well as across. That is, content and aesthetics not only circulate widely, they were also refashioned to address different topographies of imagination. I love this, topographies of imagination, and they create new topographies. Once seen primarily as consumers, today's viewers and fans amply express themselves in a variety of ways, and media producers systematically monitor this discourse, creating feedback loops that shape storylines and characters. So being me, I'm interested in the fan side of this, the reception side of it, and the work that fans historically have done to open up new markets for global media content, to educate the public about things, and to sort of take the risk historically of doing fan subbing before official subtitles were available. In the age of AI, it seems subtitles were popping up pretty instantly, but they're frequently terrible at making meaningful cultural translation as opposed to literal linguistic translation. So another friend of mine, Swapnil Rai, has written several books now on this globalizing process. She writes, global streaming companies like Netflix or Disney impose a degree of genre imperialism by suggesting the formats and themes that local companies should produce. The current process for co-productions by streamers outside the U.S. is not an open system in which local people produce what they want. Netflix's stated objective is to work to produce things that succeed locally, but also are exportable globally. So to think about, what we're pushing aside is any simplistic notion of cultural imperialism, which always seems to assume Hollywood has conquered the world. when we're thinking about something like K-pop Demon Hunter, it's Korea that is the imperial country in that relationship on cultural terms. But Netflix remains the kind of corporate power, the economic power that is controlling the strings behind the scenes. So what the global shuffle probably starts with something like Netflix moves into a country, wants to do business there, distributing content. The government says, well, if you're going to distribute content, let's say in the Philippines, then we want you to also fund production in the Philippines. So having funded production for local consumption, they then want to make that stuff available across the entire circuit of things that Netflix owns and all the countries around the world. So the economics of it makes sense. It's high income, low cost. Once you have the content. But once you're in a relationship like that, what Swapnil is arguing is then the Netflix says, well, we want content that's going to do well in your country, but it's got to be accessible in some ways to countries elsewhere. So there's a kind of homogenization taking place, but on one level, but on another level, it is not a monoculture. The economic value is in creating difference, in representing genres and styles and themes and whatnot that would reflect different regions of the world. So simultaneously, it's containing global diversity, but it also is fostering and promoting it and amplifying it. So it can't fit into the villain scenario that we used to think of cultural imperialism, yet cultural imperialism is still part of what's taking place. I'm not making that go away. I'm simply saying that's not the only thing that's happening in these transactions. So, see, I can't even see underneath all right, so this is a chart that's just talking about how Netflix has this compulsion to move into new markets, to acquire new content, and to ensure their global circulation, and sort of a way that sees itself outside of in the individual national interest, but in the corporate interest of this company that is speeding up the process of global media flows. Okay, why is that not going? Okay, so that brings us to the phenomenon that has been K-pop Demon Hunters as maybe one of the most spectacular examples of this kind of hybridity that's taking place. And here we can think about a ritual like the light stick and what the light stick might mean as a symbol of this process. And one's a symbol of Koreanness and a symbol that is being rapidly acquired by people around the world. And this is a picture of me in Ningbo acquiring a light stick from a Chinese-based fan for my favorite K-pop group, G-Idol. And I first learned about G-Idol from students I was teaching in Shanghai. And I was seeing that almost every female student I inquired had an intense relation to G-Idol, in particular the song Tomboy. And most of the men I talked to wouldn't admit to even knowing who G-Idol was. And so the gender divide was so sharp. Well, what I was finding is these Chinese women were deeply curious about what it would mean to be a tomboy and curious about the feminist politics that was fueling G-Idol and other girl crush groups out of Korea. So they were renting out theaters in China, playing music videos, K-pop music videos, and reading Korean feminist text and American feminist text, and really digging into the gender politics of this group, which is such a different response to them than what we were seeing, say, in American ideological critics who were writing about them, confused by the fact they still had the glamour girl look and are singing about liberating themselves from gender at the same time. The mixed signals there were what interested the Chinese students and what led to the dismissal of them by certain Western critics. Okay, so let's see, where am I at here? Moving forward. But we can see the light stick as a symbol that leads ultimately to the light stick revolution in South Korea, a great example of fan activism that is using the symbols of pop culture to bring about political change. And what we're seeing around the world is the use of the vernacular popular culture by young activists in countries everywhere. I might point to the use of the one-piece straw hat pirate flag in Indonesia, Malaysia, as an example of where something migrates from one country to another and then becomes a symbol of resistance. So we're starting to see light sticks get used in No Kings protest against Trump in the US. So the global shuffle is not only shuffling media content, but shuffling the political alignments, the civic imaginations that grow out of that content. It's also then, it forces us to think about genre in a new way. And I'm now teaching a course on genre and the age of global shuffle, where we look at things, how do we think about the merging of genres across countries? And I'm particularly interested in the phenomenon of Eastern Westerns. This is the Thai film, Tears of the Black Tiger. I'm a big fan. We can see how The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly gives way to something like The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, which is an important film out of South Korea. We can sort of see how Yojimbo led the way to Fistful of Dollars. So we probably always should have been looking at the global circulation of genre, but it's accelerated and intensified in the midst of this kind of flow of media content around the world. Here we can go from Seven Samurai to the Magnificent Seven of the 60s to the most recent version, which is all Black and Latino cast. So it becomes now a different set of cultures, appropriating it, remixing it, and using that story as the foundation. I'm particularly interested lately in Sukiyaki Western Django, which comes out of Japan, but features Quentin Tarantino in one of the leading roles. So again, it's this kind of weird amalgam of the Western, of Tarantino's films, of Shibuya fashion and street fashion from Tokyo today, with references to Kurosawa and references to Leone, and through them references to the American Western tradition. So it's like as the content moves across borders, new audiences are introduced to these classic genres, new filmmakers are intrigued at the incongruous matching of genre and location, and out of it comes this phenomenon of the Eastern Western. So Korea, the Korean New Wave is creating increased awareness of the Korean New Wave in America. And we know that Park is now making an English language Western once he's done being the head of the jury at Cannes Film Festival in a couple of weeks. So some of the key filmmakers of Korea are now merging interest with filmmaking in the West in ways that are both predictable and unpredictable. Hollywood has always acquired the best filmmakers from all over the world and tried to integrate it into its system. But it historically has found European filmmakers, and especially Anglo-American filmmakers, work best in the Hollywood system. But now we're seeing a different kind of hybridity emerge in film that results from our increased awareness of various Asian filmmakers, and Korea is at the center of that phenomenon at the moment. We've also seen in the West the explosion that was Squid Game. This was the biggest hit here and many countries around the world coming out of COVID, and continued to be a success, even though subsequent seasons, I thought, were not nearly as compelling or as interesting as the original, but they did better than expected for the Western markets. So we think about that genre mixing. Let's now think about something like K-pop Demon Hunters, which definitely builds on Western style genre formulas. I grew up in one of the Monkees and the Archies. My son would have grown up with the Chan Clan and Josie and the Pussycats, but the genre of teenage bands, rock pop bands, as the basis for animated television shows, deeply rooted in American television traditions, but so are Demon Hunters, right? And so my son would have grown up watching Buffy, which was an important show for me also. But we also can think about the Harry Potter world as having kinds of battles between sorcerers and spiritual warfare and so forth. And we finally would want to think about the ways that Demon Hunters is rooted in something like Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Another American television show, which has done well in markets around the world through Hanna-Barbera. We then take stylistic elements from anime. In the hands of a Korean-Canadian animator working for an American production company, seeking to do a highly condensed version of Korean culture, both traditional and contemporary, in a way that serves markets and countries around the world. So the mixing of genres, the mixing of the basic building blocks of pop culture enables them to come up with a hybrid hit that's done well almost anywhere. And then, of course, we bring in K-pop at the center of it, partnering with various K-pop labels and performers out of Korea to create a sound that is authentic, to make sure that the details of K-pop fandom are correct, and the result is a film that the soundtrack is one of the most popular things about the film. We add to this layers of cuteness, and as I travel across Asia and increasingly paying attention to East Asian cultures in particular, I think I'm learning to recognize the stylistic differences between Korean cute, Japanese cute, Chinese cute. And K-pop Demon Hunters really leans into this Korean cute, especially if you see in the outfit. And I love this outfit here on the side, Mira's polar bear top, which we see in one scene in the movie. And this is one of fan instructions to how to make your own version of that polar bear top. But the polar bear top sort of reflects this Korean cute style, which is probably the most minimalist of the three East Asian countries. That is, the fewer lines in which you can draw your bear, your polar bear, the better. So just a dot for an eye, a squiggle for ears, produces something that appeals particularly to the Korean market and is readable as Korean to those who understand the differences between these various East Asian forms of pop culture. So King, the filmmaker who sort of oversaw it, says it was a wild journey for me. I sat down to storyboard the first sequence as proof of concepts. You start to realize how many layers of figuring out needs to happen for the scene to work. First, there's mythology questions. Then, okay, what is the choreography? What is the music, the fashion, the fight choreography? You start panicking because there's so many things. One of the biggest goals was let's finally give our female characters really good makeup. Think about how K-cosmetics has become a really powerful force in a global market. In animation, all we get is blue and purple eyeshadow. So we spent all the time creating these very fashionable looks. References were Givenchy, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Alexander McQueen, and infusing Korean traditional elements with haute couture. And then that talks about the braid that Rumi wears in the film. It was having both traditional roots in Korean culture and having a fun punk rock silhouette. So we're seeing them consciously building into every element of the film things that reflect Koreanness. Not just because they want to reach Korean American markets or because they want to reach a market in Korea, but because Koreanness and the Korean wave has caught attention almost everywhere, and therefore more they can lean into Koreanness as a Korean American production, the better they can appeal to global markets. And so global cuteness translates into Halloween costumes, not just for Korean girls, but for girls of a variety of different racial backgrounds. The Japaneseness translates into certain looks and moments in the film where we have those anime eyes, the manga eyes with the hearts or the popcorn popping, becomes very much part of the look and feel of this film. Now, I've learned a lot myself about the Korean Americanness of K-pop through this podcast K-pop Dreaming, which is done by a young Korean girl, a young woman in LA of Korean American descent. And her account starts with the intersection that takes place between U.S. servicemen stationed in Seoul and the local populations. And given the nature of military service in the U.S., which is not mandatory, which tends to attract people who are desperate for money, much of the U.S. military is disproportionately Black and Latino. So when GIs are encountering Koreans, it's a meeting between people of color, darkness, and Asianness. And, Ichiwan became, they describe as what that no man's land, the contact zone, to use Larry Louise Pratt's term, where the Black culture and the Korean culture met, and out of that stew emerges a kind of what we now would think of as K-pop. So when we see, say, Korean artists appropriating Black dance style, Black language, there's been pushback by African Americans in the U.S., but that Blackness has been part of K-pop from the very beginning. And so in America, this is a kind of hit we never seen that history. Early girl groups that was sort of stood out as unusual from Korea, exoticized. Then Psy's Gangnam Style really blew up the market. And here I am in Gangnam in front of a sculpture there with a young Malaysian woman who wanted to take a picture with me doing the gesture. But I'm fascinated in downtown Seoul that you see a number of sculptures that are sculpture about dance. You heard that old story about dancing, about architecture. This is architecture about dancing, but the dance moves become codified and static rather than dynamic. And then, of course, we get to BTS and Blackpink and so forth down the line. Cat's Eye may be the latest step in that phenomenon, where we have a mostly American K-pop group that was built on reality television in a style very similar to the role that reality television has played in building other groups in Korea. Let's see. I'm going to move this out of my way so I can see here. So AJ, the songwriter, said there was so much buzz around K-beauty, K-pop, K-food, K-drama. I didn't doubt it would get a lot of attention. And the showrunner says it was important for us to have all Korean talent, not just Korean American talent, but Korean talent that is known internationally. So you can see this careful building up of this to be a global phenomenon. And then the statistics are overwhelming. As of July last year, it was the Netflix most watched original animated film of all time. In August, it reached 236 million views. Many of them are my young niece who watches it every day. But, I'm sure there are other people watching it too. In September, Netflix stated the film had passed 260 million views, overtaking the first season of Squid Game. So it's a phenomenal success. But more than and beyond that, the songs skyrocketed on the Billboard charts. And Huntrix is the first girl group to make it to the top slot on Billboard's charts since Destiny's Child with Beyonce decades ago. Then that tells you something about how male-centric Billboard's charts have been. But it's also fascinating that it took this animated fictional K-pop group to reach that status in the American music marketplace. One weekend showing of the Demon Hunters as a sing-along made $19.2 million in the U.S. and Canada. And then, of course, they won 2 Oscars and are going to be released now on the Criterion Collection, much to the consternation of many of the old-school Criterion Collection fans who see it as a space for European art movies. There's almost no Korean content in Criterion's collection so far, but the sense that it's not appropriate for this kids' movie to be on Criterion has been heard loudly through social media. And as I read those posts, I'm reminded of Heather Hendershot's discussion in Saturday Morning Censors of the Strawberry Shortcake, where she was arguing that whenever people pick bad objects or bad art, almost inevitably they pick on pre-adolescent girl culture. That, if this was not aimed at girls, there probably would have been far less outrage over the fact that K-pop Demon Hunters has gotten this level of prestige and recognition. You're seeing coming out of that, dance classes all over. Anyone who knows how to do K-pop dance is now teaching dance classes. And here at USC, there was a whole semester-long course on how they made K-pop Demon Hunters that I was not involved with, but it got a lot of national attention in the media in the US. But we're also seeing having packed out as much Korean culture into the film as we possibly can. If you look on the internet, you will see things like, this is the K-pop Demon Hunters explained by a Korean teacher that basically unpacks the language, unpacks the imagery, unpacks the mythology, so that Americans can learn Korean cultural reference points. And indeed, talking to my grad students who all grew up on K-pop now, they're saying that this has been the point of entry for their younger siblings or nieces, so forth, that are exposed to K-pop for the first time, and they're seeking further instructions by these older fans who've been there a long time. So we're seeing this is a moment of solidification, not just for this one thing, but the K-pop in general, the Korean wave culture in general in the US. And this video unpacks the food, it impacts the locations, it impacts the mythologies, it impacts the historical styles and the history of K-pop. It impacts sort of the jewelry and knickknacks that these young women are wearing in the film, again, food. And it's, this is sort of, and it says there, and for your next visit to Seoul. And so there's even the explanation that fans are pushing us to go back to Korea, or go to Korea for the first time in most cases. And so K-pop tourism, I'm hearing from my friends in Korea, is, really a big phenomenon right now, and it's drawing lots of people, both visitors and like immigrants, to Korea, because people see it as this ideal place to be. I'm skipping through some of this. So if we look at on the ground what's happening here, we see, first of all, K-pop and K-pop Demon Hunters is particularly popular with the Asian diaspora communities here in the US. We certainly have a lot of Korean Americans, but I have a grad student that just finished a dissertation, Becky Pham, who's Vietnamese American. She focused on the reception among Vietnamese American youth and found that on the one hand, that encouraged the kind of Asian or East Asian solidarity, a sense of identifying as representational politics, identifying some people who look like you on the screen, and all of the stuff we might expect, except that as they started to settle in to be fans, they were also getting pushback from the Korean Americans saying, this is our culture. It is not Vietnamese. And of course, we're seeing these K-pop groups add Vietnamese, Thai members so that they can appeal both to diaspora communities and national communities in new ways. And I think Cat's Eye is maybe the extreme version of that, where we really are trying to build from bottom up this global, but particularly Americanized version of K-pop. The second thing is it's attached to what I've written about years ago as pop cosmopolitanism. And this is a group of young, mostly Black women waiting to see a G-Idol concert in Atlanta, and many of them wearing the pink clothes to reflect their affiliation with K-pop. So what I mean by pop cosmopolitanism is the idea that young people everywhere are seeking ways to escape the parochialism of their own culture by engaging with popular culture from somewhere else. And that's really one of the things that's fueling the global shuffle. I've been into elementary schools almost everywhere. Our kids draw like anime characters or manga characters. They're dancing Bollywood dance. They are doing a variety of things that reflects a deeper awareness of cultures from somewhere else. And these young Black girls in Atlanta are attaching themselves to K-pop as a way of escaping some of the racial politics that they see around them in Atlanta and elsewhere. But another dimension of this reception side is fan nationalism. And that's what the young Vietnamese were dealing with, Vietnamese Americans were dealing with when they had pushback from Korean American fans. This is Korean. We particularly are seeing that in China, where the national governments are trying to weaponize fandom and pit them against Taiwan, pit them against other regional cultural powers, as well as to use them to attack any K-pop star who said anything perceived as negative about Chinese culture. That pushback leads to these kind of phenomena of Chinese or fan nationalism. But what's driving a lot of the reception side is what Ingu and others are writing about in a book that I'm going to help launch in Korea next month. It's called Female Nationalism, Female Universalism. And what his argument is that if you look at K-pop fans everywhere, K-drama fans everywhere, women totally dominate men in this market. And one reason for that is that women are a dominant force in the media industries of Korea, more than one would expect. Overwhelmingly, the showrunners of these K-dramas are often women in a way that's not reflective of the gender discrimination. And the stories they're telling are female-centered stories. Stories of female suffering, stories of female professionalism, stories of men putting down women, only women reversing the table by the end and getting the good guy and not the arrogant one. The female fantasies of empowerment that start with disempowerment and move to empowerment, they're arguing, is kind of at the roots of the K-drama. And the flip side of that is K-dance, right? So the dance culture is a culture of female solidarity, female celebration, where women are supporting women, and most of the Korean K-pop dancing I'm seeing doesn't involve men at all. Like, this is at a global K-pop event in Seoul in January 2023. But this is what Ingu says about female universalism. It affirms women's subjectivity cannot be reduced to a single normative will, but must be understood as fluid, performative, and diverse. How the narratives dignify a multiplicity of women's aspirations, ranging from the traditional pursuit of love and family to contemporary ambitions of becoming CEOs, prosecutors, scientists, idols, or politicians. The unifying principle is not uniformity, but recognition. Women should be free to pursue their dreams without being constrained by patriarchal scripts. And I've been particularly interested in the works that some of my students are doing on random playlist K-pop dance cultures. This is a mall in Shanghai where they put down this giant ring. They're playing on boomboxes cuts from K-pop songs, and if you know the dance moves that go to that song, you go onto the center end of the ring and dance. So sometimes it's one woman in the ring, sometimes it's a group of women in the ring. But what's interesting is that it's almost all women. So in a context like Shanghai, where there's a lot of legal prohibitions against same-sex couples appearing in public together, this creates a camouflage where lots of same-sex couples can come and dance together and enjoy each other's company in public. And so this is particularly a queer space, as well as a kind of female-dominated space of celebration that K-pop is enabling in Shanghai. And so I read it through Richard Dyer's ideas about utopianism, and he wrote about disco as a kind of, the disco floor is a kind of utopian space. And my grad students, Ketty Zhao, Yuki Yang, and Xing Zhang are like that RPD, the random playlist dance, offers an ephemeral, effective escape from the mundane realities of everyday life. In these moments, fans experience excitement, build connections, and find a sense of belonging in a community that shares the same cultural language. However, the utopian nature of the space is inherently fleeting, subject to external regulating forces. It is not a fully realized utopia, but rather constrained by the very structures that allow it to exist. So, and finally, we can see that every illustration of this globalizing process then is what one of my undergrad students calls K-popification. That is, the ways that imagery of K-pop is being taken up by sports figures, by rock figures, by racing drivers in the U.S. as a way of building appeals to younger American fans. So in many ways, the photo card phenomenon that surrounds K-pop, and particularly the K-pop album, becomes something that's performed and embraced by these American celebrities as K-pop has become such a dominant force in the American marketplace. So I'm going to end there more with a provocation of how we do this kind of research than anything else. How do we do research that is multimodal, that cuts across different media, that cuts across different nationalities, that captures this random circulation of, the global shuffle, but at the same time recognizes what Swapnil Rai calls the genre imperialism, the restraints of genre, the mixing of genre, specifically a kind of Frankenstein-like monster to appeal to global markets, and in the work that fans do in that space. So with that, I wrap things up 3 minutes early, apparently, and we can take questions, I think. I crammed a lot in there, but hopefully gave you some things to chew on.